All right, hello and welcome. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're putting an idea on trial. We're going to take the theories of a really provocative thinker, Erich Fromm, written decades ago, and see if they actually stand up to modern science. So, let's get right into it. Let's examine the evidence.
So let me just start by asking you this. What if the very thing we celebrate most in our society, our freedom, is actually, secretly, the source of our biggest anxieties? I know, it sounds kind of backward, right? The freedom to be who you want, choose your own path. What if that's what's making us miserable? It's a wild idea, and it's exactly what we're digging into.
And this is the guy right at the center of it all, Erich Fromm. He's a social psychologist. And way back in the 40s, he put out this really bold claim. He said, as humanity gets more and more free, people don't actually feel liberated. Nope, they feel more isolated, more alone. And to deal with that feeling, they start trying to, escape from freedom. And the ways they do it? They're pretty predictable and honestly, kind of scary.
Okay, so let's dive into the first piece of evidence. We're calling this one Exhibit A, the price of selling yourself. And this gets to the heart of one of Fromm's biggest ideas. So Fromm's claim was that modern life basically forces us to become what he called a marketing character. Think about it. It sounds so familiar, right? Our Instagram, our Facebook, they're basically personal storefronts. We're curating the perfect life, the perfect vacation photos, all to sell ourselves for likes and followers. Fromm said that when we do this, we start to value what we have, the stuff, the status, way more than who we actually are. And man, his own words on this just hit so hard. He wrote, "The less he felt he was being somebody, the more he needed to have possessions." Just think about that. It's this deep psychological trade-off. Your sense of self gets hollowed out and you try to fill that emptiness with stuff. Okay, that's a pretty compelling argument. It feels true. But is it just a cool theory, or does the actual data back him up? Let's bring in the science. So get this. Researchers in Australia actually created a scientific scale to measure this whole marketing character thing. And the results? They were absolutely stunning. They found that the more someone scored on this marketing scale, the more likely they were to be a conformist, to lean authoritarian, and to report higher levels of anger and depression. And here's a wild one. They even cared less about the environment. It's like Fromm had a crystal ball. He predicted the stuff almost perfectly. But here's where it gets even more nuanced. The researchers realized it wasn't just about individualism. They broke it down further. You've got individualism versus collectivism, right? But then you've also got horizontal versus vertical. Horizontal means you value equality. Vertical means you value hierarchy and rank. And look at this table. The connection was weakest in cultures that are all about equality, but the strongest link? Vertical individualism. Think about places like the United States, where the goal is not just to be unique, but to be number one. That obsession with rank, that seems to be the real driver here. And so here's the crucial takeaway from all this. That constant grind to get ahead, to get more stuff, to climb the ladder, it doesn't bring us together. It actually pushes us apart. This focus on me can have some pretty dark consequences. Okay, let's move on to the next piece of evidence in our trial. We're calling it Exhibit B, the loneliness of freedom, because this is where that idea of alienation really comes into focus. So at the very core of Fromm's whole argument is this giant paradox. Modern life gives us so much freedom, so much wealth, but we're paying a price for it. And that price is feeling totally disconnected from one another. Fromm was convinced that this feeling of being an outsider in your own world, he called it estrangement, is a one-way street to anxiety and depression. But you might be wondering, how on earth do you even measure something as vague as estrangement? Well, some researchers came up with a really brilliant way to do it. First, they asked people to rate how important certain values were to them personally, things like freedom, wealth, community. Then, they asked them to rate how important they thought those same values were to society as a whole. And by measuring the gap between those two sets of answers, they got a number that represented how out of sync a person felt with their culture. And the finding, wow. It was unbelievably clear. The bigger the gap between your personal values and what you think society values, the more estranged you feel. And the more estranged you feel, the higher your anxiety and depression. I mean, you can't get much more of a direct, measurable confirmation of Fromm's big idea than that. All right, this brings us to our final piece of evidence. And honestly, this might be the most important one for us today. Exhibit C.
escaping into authoritarianism. This is where Fromm's psychology gets very, very political.
So what causes authoritarianism? Why are some people drawn to it? For a long, long time, the main theory from a guy named Adorno was that it all came down to a rough childhood. But Fromm, he had a totally different take. He said, no, it's not about your past, it's a reaction to the present. He saw it as a desperate attempt to escape the chaos and uncertainty of freedom by just handing over control to some absolute authority. And for Fromm, the fear driving this wasn't just some general anxiety. It was a very, very specific fear.
Which, of course, leads us to the big question. A researcher named J. Corey Butler decided to figure it out. What are authoritarians actually afraid of? Is it just everything, or is Fromm right? Is it something more specific? And the results he found were just, whoa. He measured what high authoritarian individuals feared most. And you know what it wasn't? It wasn't getting robbed. It wasn't dangerous animals. Look at this chart. The one thing that was off the charts high was their fear of social disorder, the fear of chaos, of society itself breaking down. It completely dwarfed everything else.
And there it is. This brilliantly illustrates what Fromm was talking about. Leaning towards authoritarianism isn't just some random personality quirk. It is a direct, motivated response to a deep fear of social and political chaos. When you feel like the world is spinning out of control, the promise of simple, absolute order becomes incredibly, incredibly attractive.
So, we've reviewed all the evidence. It's time to deliver the verdict in the trial of Erich Fromm. The verdict is in, and it seems Erich Fromm is, well, guilty. Guilty of being astonishingly right. We're talking about theories from over 80 years ago, and modern science is showing they're not just philosophy. They are real, observable, measurable facts of our lives today. The marketing character, yep, it's real, and it's linked to unhappiness. Feeling estranged from society? That's a real predictor of anxiety. And the draw of authoritarianism? It is absolutely supercharged by a fear of social chaos. Okay, so why does any of this really matter today? Because what Fromm gave us is basically a psychological roadmap to understanding our modern world. When people feel powerless, when they feel alone, and when they are terrified of how fast society is changing, they become prime candidates for leaders who show up and promise simple, strong, absolute answers. And the source material for this explainer points to a really stark example of this. You might remember back in 2016 at the Republican National Convention when Donald Trump said, "I alone can fix it." Fromm's theory would say that this is the exact type of message that cuts through the noise for people who are desperate to escape from the messy, scary, complicated reality of modern freedom. And so that leaves us with one last big question. In our world of perfectly curated Instagram lives, of deep, bitter social divisions, and with the constant pull of charismatic leaders who offer easy answers, are we still trying to escape from freedom? It's a question Fromm posed over 80 years ago. And when you look around today, you have to wonder if it's more relevant now than it's ever been.